Coming up on the Sky News Daily with me, Neil Paterson, China and the United States slap tariffs on each other's exports. But could the trade war turn into actual war?
The world is becoming increasingly complex and volatile. How can we make sense of it all?
I'm Richard Engel.
And I'm Yalda Hakim.
And we're the top international correspondents at NBC News and Sky News. And we present Sky News' latest podcast, The World. Each week, we'll cut through the noise to guide you through the week's global events and explain to you why what happens out there matters to you wherever you are.
Listen now to The World with Richard Engel and me, Yalda Hakim, wherever you get your podcasts.
Sky News' Unreliable Witness is back. There is a new twist in the Eleanor Williams story, the girl who lied, jailed for fabricating evidence of a grooming gang. In court, it was suggested her diaries were fake, but we've got extracts, and if they were, somehow, within the fantasy, Eleanor identified a real monster.
Barrow got branded to be a lying town. It's not. Grooming was happening here.
Follow Unreliable Witness in your podcast app.
If war is what the US wants, be it a tariff war, a trade war, or any other type of war, we're ready to fight till the end. Those, the words of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, pointedly retweeted by its embassy in Washington ahead of President Trump's speech to Congress, and, understandably, it's caused a bit of alarm. The two countries are locked in an escalating trade war, both sides slapping tariffs on the other's exports. And with the messy diplomacy of Donald Trump's White House, how will Xi Jinping of China navigate the tit-for-tat on trade? And more importantly, is he preparing for something much more dangerous? Nicole Johnston is our correspondent based in Beijing. This is a pretty significant statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, isn't it?
It is. It's really strong. It's remarkable to hear China say, in case of a trade war or any other type of war, we're ready to fight till the end. With all of this talk of a trade war and tit-for-tat tariffs between the US and China, China's been very careful and they've been calibrated in their language. They've not really wanted to escalate the situation with the US. They've played it cool and calm, but this week it seems that the gloves were off and they wanted to send a message so extraordinary that they sent the same message 2 days in a row, the exact same message. First here in Beijing, then through the Chinese embassy in the United States. So clearly saying that they're fed up, they've had enough, and they want the US to know about it.
Let's talk about the trade war specifically and start with the United States end. I mean, what has Donald Trump done to China?
He did exactly what he said that he would do. He started imposing tariffs. So in February, we had the first round, so to speak, a 10% tariff across the board on China. And then now, this week, another 10%. So 20% in total. Now, it's not the 60% that Donald Trump threatened last year during the presidential period in the lead up to the election, but it is getting higher. And we can see from that statement, from the 20%, that it appears to be starting to worry China. And with Donald Trump saying this week that there's no maximum at this stage, I think Beijing is starting to wonder, well, how far is this going to go?
So what is the current state of the Chinese economy? I mean, one thing I do know, youth unemployment's a rising issue. 1
in every 5 or 6 students, young people, can't find a job, which is a real worry for a country like China with such a huge population. The other big problem is the demographic crisis. As is the case in much of the world, there are too many old people here, not enough young people. People aren't getting married, they're not having babies. These are all issues the government's trying to address. The property crisis is still ongoing from one end of the country to the other. We've travelled around, you get out of the airport, you drive into a city, and you will have miles of empty flats or unfinished buildings. People have lost their life savings over the last few years investing in real estate that hasn't even been finished. And then the other really big one, which the government was concentrating on today, is consumer demand. So Chinese aren't spending. They're putting their money under their mattress for a rainy day because they don't have confidence in the economy. This isn't a country that has a strong welfare system. So if you lose your job or if you get sick or you have an elderly relative to care for, there's not a strong state system to back you up. There's been a long list of stimulus measures over the last 6 months, but it's difficult to turn around an economy so quickly. These feel like measures that are tinkering around the edges, but not doing enough to give China the consumption boost that it really needs.
I mean, it's fascinating to hear you talk about the Chinese economy like that, because I think there is a tendency for us here in the West to view it as big and massive, which it obviously is, but as unassailable, as unhurtable. I mean, is it possible that these Trump tariffs could bite and bite significantly?
I think they will bite. Listening to this statement that we've had over the last 2 days, clearly the Chinese government, while they'll want to talk it up and show confidence and strength for their domestic audience, are worried about it. We've been speaking to exporters in the southern part of China, and they're worried as well. They know that they can't do anything about it. They say, well, what do? We'll just have to let it be. But, I mean, China is still a massive market for the United States. Even though China, over the last few years, has managed to diversify its exports so that it's not as reliant on the United States. It's exporting all over the world. But for sure, China's worried about it.
Nicole, we've been talking of this as a tit-for-tat trade war. So what has been the Chinese response?
The first time around, their response was targeted and measured, and it wouldn't have had a massive impact on the United States. They hit crude oil, liquefied natural gas and coal. And an interesting one, they started to once again impose restrictions on the export of critical minerals from China. And we know how critical minerals have become a massive issue for the US and for President Trump. Well, China has that stitched up. Over 90% of all the world's critical minerals are processed by China. So it has a chokehold on the world supply. And that is an incredibly powerful lever that this country can pull. Now, with the latest doubling by the United States of its tariffs, China hit back very quickly and much harder, with these exports 10 to 15% on agricultural products, everything from chicken to corn to cotton. Now, the US's main export market for its agriculture and for its food is China. So this is going to hit the US hard. It's going to hit many of those states in the US that are ordinarily big Trump supporters.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like this set of tariffs from China is personal, targeted at Donald Trump, as you say, targeting his support base. We know that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have a working relationship. What is the nature of the relationship between Xi Jinping and Trump?
Well, there hasn't been much of a relationship over the last couple of months. There hasn't been a direct phone conversation between the two leaders since just after the inauguration. And both sides say that they have a good relationship. President Trump has said that he admires Xi Jinping. And we had been waiting for a second phone conversation, but it hasn't happened. Analysts had also been talking about there being some kind of grand bargain or trade deal that would incorporate all sorts of things. Trade, TikTok, this ongoing fentanyl issue with the United States accusing China of producing these chemical precursors that are used to make fentanyl and then have fueled the opioid crisis in the United States. That is the reason that Trump is giving for these tariffs. But we're not seeing any signs that there are serious talks underway. It seems that both sides are staying in their corners, almost waiting to see who's going to blink first.
I'm wondering what the response has been from Beijing to seeing people like the Vice President, J.D. Vance, the Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, talking about China as being a greater threat than Russia. What's been the response in Beijing?
China always says that it is a peace-loving country, that it's not a participant in the war in Ukraine, that it wants there to be a peaceful resolution. It always pushes back and says that its trading relationship with Russia is something that it should be allowed to do. Now, the US and Europe, they don't buy that. They say that China has been exporting dual-use items to Russia that allow it to power its defense industrial base, essentially build weapons from the advanced semiconductors or machinery tools that China has been sending. China, of course, is buying a huge amount of products, agricultural products, cheap energy from Russia. So this is a great relationship between China and Russia that is not going to go anywhere. Now, we don't know, but certainly China's relationship with Russia does seem very strong for now.
But just as regards the United States and China, I mean, look, geopolitics these days is pretty much entirely doom and gloom. The fact that we are seeing the Chinese talking about a trade war perhaps becoming another form of conflict, that does mean it's a possibility, doesn't it?
Anything's a possibility, of course. But from China's perspective, what they say time and time again is that they don't want a war. They appear very focused on their domestic problems at home, on their economic problems, on things like getting people to go shopping and getting people to have babies again. So I don't think there is any immediate threat or risk of a war with the US.
On our sister podcast, The World, with Yalda Hakim, they've been speaking to Matt Pottinger, the former Deputy National Security Advisor to Donald Trump, and frankly, one of the leading US experts on foreign affairs. Here's what he's thinking as regards China and its economy for war.
He's preparing for war. Xi Jinping is part of the reason that China's economy is failing is precisely because he's turning it into a wartime economy. He's preparing his economy for war so that it can withstand the shocks of war. That means he's willing to undergo massive inefficiencies in the economy. He's willing to stockpile food. He's stockpiling copper and all kinds of inputs into the economy.
That's Matt Pottinger's view. I mean, what do you make of that, Nicole?
It's a really strong view. It's exactly what we would expect to hear from Matt Pottinger. He's a major China hawk. And it is quite extraordinary to hear it. What is China really up to? We don't know. I've been speaking with nuclear experts over the last couple of months, and they ask the same question. This country is in the middle of a massive military buildup. There's no denying that. It now has the largest blue water navy in the world. We were in Zhuhai at their air show last year, checking out the latest in Chinese drones and fighter aircraft, and what they've developed is extraordinary, and they're clearly investing a huge amount of resources into it. But it's not only military, it's also technology. We've had this story over the last few weeks about China's development in artificial intelligence with DeepSeek. China keeps emphasizing now how important it is for entrepreneurs to go down this technology route, whether it's AI, robotics, quantum computing. I mean, China is all in, and it considers that to be a massive part of the economy. Whether this is China trying to build its defenses for the future or prepare for war, prepare for the possibility of an eventual war over Taiwan, that is something that could happen. Prepare also for conflict in the South China Sea. We know that military vessels and helicopters from China operate very closely to US allies, not only US ships, but also Japan, Philippines, South Korea, Australia. And there is always the possibility that something could go wrong. And if something did go wrong in that theatre, well, then all bets would be off and anything could happen. The
thing that leaps immediately to mind then is Taiwan. I mean, if we have a US president who is retreating from the United States' traditional role in the world, I mean, if I were sitting in Taiwan right now, I'd be a bit worried.
I think there's a real sense of unease in the region about exactly what President Trump's position is when it comes to Taiwan. Last year, he made the point that Taiwan was a long way away from the United States. He's also said that they're stealing our chips, that they should be paying for their defense. Taiwan government officials have been in the US to try and push their own case. So we don't know what the position of Trump will be when it comes to Taiwan and China. He was asked about it recently. He wouldn't be drawn on it. He said, I'm not getting into that. It's really messy, isn't it?
Thanks, Nicole. And to listen to the full interview with Matt Pottinger, you can find Sky News The World with Richard Engel and Yalda Hakim on your podcast app. That's a lot for today. We are back again tomorrow.
The world is becoming increasingly complex and volatile. How can we make sense of it all?
I'm Richard Engel,
And I'm Yalda Hakim.
and we're the top international correspondents at NBC News and Sky News, and we present Sky News' latest podcast, The World. Each week, we'll cut through the noise to guide you through the week's global events and explain to you why what happens out there matters to you wherever you are.
Listen now to The World with Richard Engel and me, Yalda Hakim, wherever you get your podcasts.